Welcome, everyone. This is the Carrboro Town Council meeting of March 28th, 2023. Appreciate you all being here. We have a pretty busy agenda tonight, so we'll just get right into it. Before we start, council members, I want to ask for your permission to make a couple of small adjustments to the agenda. First would be to move up the solar installation item to be the first item under other matters. Any objection to doing that? Okay. And then secondly, would add an item to the end of the agenda, which we'll just call matters by the town manager, so that the town manager can share what I'm promised is a very brief report on a personnel matter. Any objections to that?
Is that closed door then?
Will not be closed session. There will not be any personal issues discussed. Just a quick report from the manager. Okay, great. Well, we'll proceed. We're going to start, as we usually do, I think, with, Gary's here. Wow, what a surprise. What a treat, Gary. So designated by our poet laureate, Liza Wolfe Francis, is our old friend and former poet laureate, Gary. Would you like to, you get to kick off the meeting. Will you take the microphone? Yes, please. You know the drill. It hasn't been that long, Gary.
Good to see you.
Hi, everybody. I don't know if you know or not, but one of the members of your poetry council, Mara High, just won the Terrain Award, which is one of the most significant ecological poetry awards in the country. We're all celebrating that.
That's great news, yeah. Maura is actually going to be one of the organizers of a Poetry Month event with our poet laureate later next month, so we'll learn more about that.
This poem stems from my belief that we still have some emotional processing to do regarding the pandemic and its effects and all of its outreaches. It's called January Grace. I am struggling up from COVID after canceling family plans and missing Christmas. Gifts scattered on the divan in the back room, desolate. I feel dislocated, lonely, lost to my life and purpose, drying like a citrus fruit powdering on a high shelf. But I wake at 4 a.m. and I can feel the world turn. I walk out into the cold, bright, starry night and stand as long as I can in my bedclothes until Coyote calls. My neighbor's rooster responds, and there is a dimly perceptible lighting in the glassy sky. I am shivering but ecstatic. Returning to the house, standing by the good wood fire, kettle on for tea and whiskey, I ponder. I can sense this novel is about to get good. And I decide to read it all the way through, here in this beautiful room. I decide to write love letters to my sons, to clean the kitchen, to beg off appointments and walk in the woods. First, I will write a poem, this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. All right, next up we have a resolution by the council, which I'm going to ask Councilmember Romaine to introduce, since I believe she did this one last year, and it was actually a recommendation that came to us from Terry Buckner, who's also here in the audience today. So Susan, would you mind reading the resolution?
Absolutely. From here, or?
I think from here is fine, unless Terry wants to come stand. She does not. I suspected not.
Yes, it's an honor. This resolution is to recognize Native Plant Month. Whereas native plants are indigenous species that have evolved and occur naturally in a particular region, ecosystem, and habitat. And whereas native plants are vital for maintaining and restoring the healthy ecosystem needed to sustain our environment, including but not limited to seed dispersal, pollination of crops and natural vegetation, prevention of flooding, drought and erosion, regulation of disease-carrying organisms, and moderation of weather extremes. And whereas North Carolina is home to more than 3,900 native plant species, including trees, shrubs, vines, grasses, and wildflowers, making it one of the most diverse states for native plants in the Southeast. And And whereas native plants provide shelter as well as nectar, pollen, and seeds that serve as food for native butterflies, insects, birds, amphibians, and other wildlife in ways that non-native plants cannot. And whereas 969 of the native plant species in North Carolina have been designated as significantly rare and/or in decline and may be in danger of extinction. And whereas 94 of those 969 imperiled plants have been found here in Orange County, and whereas habitat loss and degradation, extreme weather events, and invasive species have contributed to the decline of native plants in North Carolina and Orange County, and whereas native plants are essential components of resilient ecosystems and our natural heritage. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Carrboro Town Council designates April 2023 as Native Plant Month and recognizes the benefits of native plants to the environment and the economy of the town of Carrboro, this 28th day of March, 2023.
Thank you very much, Susan.
Thank you, Terry, for...
Thanks to Terry for bringing this to us. This actually was last year when we first did this, I think, and it's related to one that's been happening, I think, at the federal level for the last few years. So. Great. So those who are listening at home, Terry's telling us that Orange County and Hillsborough will also be adopting the same resolution. So, thanks, Terry. Susan, I'll take that as a motion and ask for a second.
Second.
Moved by Susan, seconded by Randy, that we approve this resolution. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The matter passes unanimously. Thank you, Terry. All right. Next on the agenda, I have a proclamation to share. And we have a special guest to receive this proclamation from the Board of Directors of the Orange County Rape Crisis Center, Catherine Rich. And Catherine, if you would join me. Okay, I'm going to read this, Catherine. Hopefully capture everything here and then share the microphone with you to share some statements. This is a proclamation of Sexual Assault Awareness Month. Whereas sexual violence is common, over half of women and almost 1/3 of men in the United States have experienced sexual violence involving physical contact in their lifetimes. And whereas sexual violence starts early, more than half of female rape survivors and more than 40% of male rape survivors reported that they were raped when they were minors. And whereas sexual violence disproportionately affects some groups, women and racial and ethnic minority groups, trans and gender nonconforming people, people with disabilities, and children experience a higher burden of sexual violence. And whereas sexual violence is costly, rape is the most costly crime to its survivors, totaling over $3 trillion in lifetime societal costs, considering such factors as medical costs, lost work productivity, pain and suffering, and lost quality of life. And whereas in 2001, the National Sexual Violence Resource Center organized the first nationwide Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and in 2009, President Barack Obama became the first president to proclaim April as Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And whereas the Orange County Rape Crisis Center, a nonprofit agency that has served this community since 1974, is working to stop sexual violence and its impact through support, education, and advocacy. And whereas the Orange County Rape Crisis Center assisted more than 900 survivors of sexual violence, their loved ones, and community professionals in 2022. And whereas the Orange County Rape Crisis Center works with the county's 2 school systems and other groups to provide students with age-appropriate information about violence prevention, reaching more than 15,500 youth and adults each year. And whereas the Orange County Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Response Committee brings together members of law enforcement, the medical community, the legal system, and community advocates to improve services for survivors of sexual assault who come forward. And whereas victim blaming continues to be an enormous problem in instances of rape and sexual assault. Now, therefore, be it resolved that I, Damon Siles, Mayor of the town of Carrboro, North Carolina, do hereby proclaim the month of April 2023 to be Sexual Assault Awareness Month in Carrboro. I encourage all residents to speak out against sexual violence and to support the local community's efforts to prevent and respond to these crimes. Thanks for being here, Catherine, and I'd love for you to share some words.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Siles, and thank you to the Town Council. On behalf of the Orange County Rape Crisis Center, I'm happy to accept this proclamation and we really appreciate your solidarity with our mission and helping to raise awareness in our community. In conjunction with the Sexual Awareness Month in April, there will be a number of events and fundraising, some quite fun, and they're all listed on our website. If you go to the, I think it's just ocrcc.com and click on SAAM. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for your organization. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Next on our agenda is the announcement of upcoming meetings. Madam Clerk.
Good evening. The only meeting that's on the calendar for the next week is the next town council meeting on April 4th at 7 p.m. right here. So we have a pretty clear calendar.
Great. Thanks, Mary. I'll just announce one that probably wouldn't have made it on the town calendar, but it is relevant to us. The annual joint meeting of the Durham Chapel Carrboro MPO Board and the Capital Area or Campo MPO Board will be tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock in Cary. So be driving down to Cary during rush hour tomorrow. Hopefully carpooling with someone if he can make it with me, but we'll see. Any other town meetings to announce? If not, I wanted to just, this isn't a town meeting, but I wondered if Eleazar wouldn't mind sharing an invitation to an event that's happening in Raleigh tomorrow that's incredibly important, especially this particular legislative session.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. As some of you may know, I've been organizing, along with the organization that I work with, an advocacy day at the legislature. So tomorrow we're expecting over 100 advocates and LGBTQ folks from across the state who will be coming together to rally, as well as to meet with our elected representatives and senators in the NCGA. We'll be holding over, I think last count was over 65 meetings throughout the evening, or throughout the day. So if folks are able to come, we would definitely welcome you. We'll be we'll be rallying in front of the legislature at 10 and 10:30 in the morning. We'll be holding some press. We'll be having some lunch for folks, and then we go straight into those meetings. So thank you, Mr. Mayor, for allowing me a couple of seconds on that. And again, no matter what issue we're talking about, whether it's LGBTQ rights, whether it's immigrant rights, whether there's protections for our community, whatever that is, I think this legislature has shown multiple times that's not what they're looking to protect. So anytime we can, I encourage anyone and everyone to make your voice heard.
Thank you, Eleazar. So folks who are interested in joining Equality North Carolina tomorrow in Raleigh, that you can find information on their website, equalitync.org. There's some pretty nasty legislation being considered right now, as you all know, so it's a good time to make yourselves heard. Okay. I have a couple of people signed up for public comment, but they're related to an agenda item later on this evening, so we're going to move right on, Mr. Manager, to the consent agenda, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. The first item is a resolution to consider the Art Center COVID-19 Mitigation Business Grant Award modification. The purpose of this item is for the council to consider that modification to the award. The next item is a request to set a public hearing on renewal of an annexation boundary agreement for the towns of Chapel Hill and Carrboro.
Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
I'd like to pull one. I haven't had a chance to read those minutes.
At the minutes. Okay, so can you modify your motion, Eleazar, to pull number one?
Yes.
Or tabling or to postpone to the next or to a subsequent meeting?
So I move to approve items 2 and 3 from the consent agenda, and subsequently table item 1 till next meeting.
Is that okay with you, Randy?
Absolutely.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Sorry. Barbara, go ahead.
Is it passed or not?
Well, we'll.
Mine
go ahead.
is comments. It has nothing to do with taking anything
Okay,
off.
go ahead.
So I believe Miss Hawk, I don't know, you looked confused with the public comment. Did you
Yeah,
understand
I
what
got
the
a note
mayor?
here. Yeah.
Do you want to?
I'll do it. Yeah, so Linda apparently can't stay, so I'm going to ask everyone's patience to let her speak during the public comment period ahead of time. Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah.
And I'll make the same offer to the other person I have signed up, which is Dave Otto, who's, I believe, here. If you'd like to do that as well, Dave. Okay, great. Linda, come on up and join us, please.
Don't forget to vote on this, what's before you.
I think we did vote on the consent agenda, but I'll
Right,
just...
and I had a comment also before, if you don't mind. I had a comment.
Hold on one second. Linda.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
So we did vote
wait.
unanimously to approve items 2 and 3 on the consent agenda. That was a motion by Eleazar, a second by
I'll vote on that.
We did.
Where you at, Nick?
Move fast, Nick.
Really fast. Sorry, that's what I was talking.
I'll speak up. As I'm often told by Braxton Fushi, I need to speak up. So. All right. Barbara, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. And so my comments were about the use of the race equity pocket questions. I see pocket questions for one agenda item, and then for two more, those are being brought forth later. So just as a reminder, the race equity officer did say in the absence of racial equity assessment lens, the pocket questions will be used. And that's important to me because we talk about process often, and race equity work has to stay on the front burner. Right? So it shouldn't be put on the back burner. And we need a more consistent process about the race equity tools. And I'm thinking more on the front end to inform our decision making. I don't like it when we get agenda items and we have the agenda item and then they're saying race equity questions come later, the pocket questions. Because to me, that kind of divides your thinking. I know we don't all process information the same. But certainly I think about myself, I start to formulate opinions and ideas as soon as I have the information in front of me. And so I don't know who I'm talking to. I assume it would be the town manager, Mr. White. And so I guess my last question is this, I don't know whose guidance this is. Is this guidance from the Race Equity Office? And can we consistently get the race equity pocket questions on the front end? And if we can't, I respectfully ask that we not bring the agenda item forward at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Thanks for that comment. So, Mr. Manager, wanting some consistency in process about how we employ those questions. Is that understood?
It is, yes. We're working through the process of how we deliver those and when. So, yes, we're working on that as a written document, so we'll have a procedure to follow.
Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry, Mayor. And does that mean they will appear on the front end going forward? That's probably the biggest thing. And if not, can we hold off on bringing agenda items forward unless we have those pocket questions?
Yes, that's our goal, to make sure they're available at the time if the agenda item is coming forward to council.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Barbara. Okay, we've approved the consent agenda, Mr. Attorney. And we're going to skip back to the public comment period, and I'll invite Linda Hawk to come on up. And Linda, you're familiar with the usual. Ask you to keep your comments to about 3 minutes.
So I was here last week. Linda Hawk, 102 Mill Rock Court, and I really thank you for letting me go. I was in the hospital yesterday for surgery and got out this morning at 10:30. And I'm back here because I'm as concerned as I was last week about our town and how we practice, how we protect everybody's interests in the tenets of democracy and good governance. I know you have an RFP I think that you're going to be looking at. I know that an alternative RFP may have been presented to you by certain groups. I would ask that you base your governance on facts, not opinions or hopes or dreams. I wanted to say a few things about the 2009 report. It's 14 years old. I've been involved with that since in the last 14 years. A lot has gone on since then. One of the first is at your TAB, which I served on for 7 years and was the chair of. At no time, we very seldom even mentioned the Bowling Creek Greenway, and we actually sent to you as part of the climate action thing that it would not work as a transportation corridor and that you look at the entire Bowling Forest and not center solely on those things that were in there. In addition, there are, I can't go through them all tonight because I don't have the time. You do not build in a riparian zone, no science, so I assume you believe in science. The North Carolina Heritage Program has said this is a historical and cultural heritage thing, and that includes the black beach there used during segregation, and not to mention the cave where the munitions were used during the Civil War. I am really concerned about the racial equity part of this, which I taught, and the whole othering part. We got a pump track at MLK Park instead of a splash pad. And I am sure that there are a lot of kids in this town who don't have bikes and also who don't have a way to get to our public pools in the summer. You've adopted a resolution in 2005 that you would protect and conserve this natural area. You've had multiple 319 grants. There has been a lot of smear campaigns in this town in the last year or so, including on Friends of Bowling Creek, that this town is partnering with at this very moment. Money, volunteers, and scientific expertise. Any paved path would need to be 50 feet away from the creek. That's what your 2009 report says. That's a fact. It also says it should be 100 feet away. OASA says any pavement has to be 10 feet from a manhole. It cannot incorporate the manholes. There is not enough room. We can put the science away and just talk about the practicality. In addition, last thing. If I give me just I'm a little slower because I had all this anesthesia. I don't see how you can ignore the 2020 bike plan and its recommendation for rails to trails. And I used to be an investigative reporter. I've done a lot of research on this. The only comparable trail is the Capitol Crescent Trail and a tunnel under Wisconsin Avenue in Bethesda, Maryland, that they are trying to repair that with the Purple Line Metro extension. And the fix of that is $82.5 million. The tunnel is $27 million. If you put a tunnel under Estes, which is what it's required, that's the kind of, even if you get 80% of it. And the very last thing, the connection to the neighborhoods. Your own 2009 plan says that there are no connections to the neighborhoods across the creek, that they have to build their own bridges, as I understand it, and that they're asked to cost share. So these are really important facts that need to be explored before as any part of any public engagement, but the public needs to understand these things as well, I think. And I really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Linda. And please get some rest. I appreciate you taking time today. And why don't we go ahead and have Dave Otto come up. Welcome, Dave. And Dave, as with Linda, we ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to say a few words. That's all I plan to say tonight. First, I want to say how delighted I am to see discussion of the Bowling Creek Greenway back on the agenda after a hiatus of more than 10 years. It's high time that we get back to discussing this very important resource for the town of Carrboro. The second point, y'all see, I need a cane and a walking stick these days. In 1 month, I'll be 82 years old. The bitter irony for me is having been one of the founders of the Friends of Bowling Creek, having served as the president for the first president or vice chair of the Friends of Bowling Creek for the first 8 years of his existence. The bitter irony for me today is even though I live right on the creek, I can barely get down to the creek anymore. It's very difficult to walk along the very rough Owasso roadway. In the notes, preparations for the public discussion, there's note of how we need to listen to the handicapped needs of people in the community. I don't like to think of myself as handicapped. I'm a mere 82 years old, but in fact I am handicapped. And we need to give serious thought to that. And I look forward to open discussion in the process as we go forward. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Dave.
Happy birthday.
All right, Mr. Manager, thanks for that little deviation there from the agenda. I think we'll move on now to other matters.
The first item is approval for solar photovoltaic projects. The purpose of this agenda item is to request that the town council consider awarding a contract to Eagle Solar and Light to install solar PV on town buildings, including Fire Station 1, Public Works, and the 203 South Greensboro Street project. And Ms. Smadiger, our Capital Projects Manager, is here to give a brief presentation.
Thank you.
All right. Good evening, Mayor and Council.
Good evening.
So, again, the purpose, we're seeking approval for town solar photovoltaic projects, or PV. So this started with a request for proposals that we issued last year, and it was part of exploring the solar procurement process for the 203 project. So we issued a RFP for to look at solar on multiple town properties, and also to look at potential financing options. The properties included Public Works, Century Center, Fire Station 1, Anderson Park, the 203 project, West Roof, the building roof, and also the 203 project parking deck. We received 2 responses, one from Southern Energy Management and one from Eagle Solar and Light. We formed a staff evaluation committee to review the responses, and we also interviewed each firm. Ultimately, we are recommending Eagle Solar and Light for a few reasons. They had a more realistic methodology for calculating the investment on the projects. They are using a Carrboro-based minority-owned business for installation. They had a positive reference from Owasso, and their pricing was a little bit more competitive. So initially, the goal was to pursue funding for these projects through the capital improvements project planning process, with the exception of the 203 West Roof, which is budgeted in the 203 construction project. However, in December, the council took administrative action to move forward with 3 staff-recommended projects in order to meet the deadline for reserving the Duke Energy rebates, which expired at the end of 2022. And so we did go ahead and reserve rebates for the 203 project West Roof, Public Works, and Fire Station 1. climate action. So installation of solar on town buildings is a recommendation in the town's energy and climate protection plan. And so the long-term goal to reduce 2010 levels of greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2030. And so these three projects will reduce the town's greenhouse gas emissions by 16%, or the equivalent of 3,164 metric tons of CO2 over the next 20 years. And also climate action is one of the foundational themes of the comprehensive plan. So as I mentioned, the 203 project West Roof is budgeted for. We've also received Orange County Sustainability Grant funding for that project. The Public Works and Fire Station 1 projects do require funding and project ordinance approval. And so this is the summary of the three projects. You can see the size in kilowatts at the top, and estimated annual energy production, and estimated cost savings, which would be a reduction in utility bills, the greenhouse gas emissions over 20 years, the cash purchase price, and then the Duke rebate. The direct pay is the Inflation Reduction Act money that we are expecting that these projects would be applicable for. However, instructions haven't come out on how to get that money. And so the net cost is down there at the end, and then a 30-year investment calculation using the energy savings and annual energy savings, and then a 3% discount rate for the NPV. So the timeline, Duke does require installation within 1 year of the utility interconnection agreement, which we've been working on and was just finalized this month. And so the 203 project, Public Works and Fire Station 1 should all be installed by the end of this year, and they can be installed. And then, as I mentioned before, the other projects will be considered for inclusion in the capital improvements projects budget planning process. So there is a resolution for your consideration. Authorize awarding the contract to Eagle Solar and Light for these three projects, and approve the project ordinance to establish funding for Public Works and Fire Station 1. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Ben. Sammy, go ahead.
Ben, thanks for your presentation. I find it very thorough and appreciate the information. I'm very glad we're able to do this, and it's in line with both our comprehensive plan and our climate action plans. And I look forward to looking to implement the other solar on the parking deck. It's unfortunate that we weren't able to leverage the loans that we've been getting for the 203 project and fold in and incorporate solar and make it even more significant, especially in light of the fact that we're in a climate emergency and scientists say we may have already run out of time. And the latest IPCC report describes this being the last chance to do anything before it's out of human control. So it's pretty ominous. And I'm glad we're able to do these little baby steps, but we still have to do a lot more. Having said that, I would like to move the resolution with much gratitude to staff and your work.
Thank you, Sammy. Is there a second?
Second.
Right. And I will call in more speakers. Just want to confirm for the clerk that the motion was made by Sammy and seconded by Eleazar. Randy, and then Susan.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you, Ben, for pulling this together and pushing it forward. I really appreciate it. My only question Actually, it's not a question. I just want public to know that the deck is going to be made ready for solar to be added in. Isn't that correct?
Right. The infrastructure will be there.
So everything will be set.
Right.
What would you imagine could be a timeline where that could come in to play?
It's mostly a matter of getting the funding, the money. To put solar on the deck requires a canopy structure, and so it's a little bit more of a complicated installation than a normal roof-mounted system. So in that sense, it would take longer to build out. But as I said, the infrastructure is there, meaning that like the conduit is in place. Would be the canopy structure, and then all of the panels is the main cost there.
So at what point is it possible for that to come back to council as, fiscally available?
I mean, it could be included in this year's CIP, but it is quite a bit of cost, so there might be some other priorities, and that was one of the reasons the RFP was done, because as far as return on investment, money and emissions, with that canopy structure there's other places that it might be better places for solar around town, looking at all town properties.
Yeah.
Probably ultimately a conversation really with the manager about the budget.
Yeah, I'd really, and I want to thank you and Laura for the work you did on Solarized Carrboro, because some of us are.
It was all Laura. That had nothing to do with that.
Well, some of us are going to be seeing that solar in April, so thank you. Convey that to her.
Yep. She helped on this, though. So.
Yeah.
Thank you. Susan, go ahead.
Thank you for your presentation, Ben, and I'll look forward to supporting the resolution. Just a few minutes. I also wanted to thank Sammy, because when you see the slide, you appreciate just how big these Duke Energy rebates are. So appreciate your help moving this along. This is an example. It sort of reminds me of the weatherization of low-income homes, where we can lift up racial equity, we can lift up climate, and over the long term, we can lift up affordability here in Carrboro. So we're doing a lot with these rooftop solars. Just a couple of questions. I also did want to mention, I really appreciate that that Eagle will be partnering with Action Solar and Electric, which is Carrboro-based and BIPOC owned. So I did appreciate that. Just a few things here, Ben. There was mention about the rooftop solar may result in temporary street closures, loss of parking spaces in our downtown. I think it was mentioned in the abstract. And I was hoping you could elaborate just a little bit on that. Is that just during the deliveries of the materials, or throughout? It looks like the projects could last for about a month. Would it be that entire month that would be occurring? I know that the 203 has been a little disruptive for downtown parking and what have you, so I was just going to see to what extent this will add to that.
Yeah, I mean, with the 203 project, that construction will coincide with Barn Hill's construction, so that'll be done towards the end of that process. So I don't think that would apply for the 203, and just any kind of normal parking delays with any kind of contractor working in town, but I don't expect that to be an issue.
Okay, good. Another question is, fire station number 2 was not included as one of the possibilities for the solar panels, and I was curious why that was.
Wasn't included in the RFP. It could definitely be looked at. I think the reason we were looking at those buildings, Fire Station 2 already has solar thermal, so a lot of that roof is being taken up with those panels. But there would likely be room to at least explore solar PV as well.
Right. So when we revisit all of this, I think maybe with the Inflation Reduction Act funds,
maybe that would rise up as a possibility. Thank you. And final question, Ben. I'm just kind of curious. It's mentioned that there will be cost for the maintenance, and this is stretched over 30 years, so those costs will add up over time. Are the maintenance costs included in these installation costs, or is that entirely separate?
They do include them in that bottom line, the life cycle cost, but it's not included in the upfront cost. And the main maintenance cost is they do recommend replacing the inverter after 15 years. So the solar panels are rated or warranted for 30 years, but the inverter is 15. So that's where the main maintenance cost comes from.
Is that a very significant cost?
No, I mean, it would just be a few $1,000s, something in the operating budget.
I see. Okay. Okay, great. Good. Thank you so much for your help.
Any other questions for Ben? Not seeing any. We have a motion by Sammy and a second by Eleazar to approve the resolution in the packet, which would award the contract to Eagle Solar and allocate funding for staff to get the work done.
Great.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Matter passes unanimously. Ben, thanks so much for your hard work on this.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Manager, next item, please.
Okay. The next item is the Bowling Creek Greenway Phases 3 and 4 review of a draft scope of work for a facilitated community engagement and participation process. And the purpose of the agenda item is to request that the Town Council consider a draft scope of work related to consultant services for community engagement and participation process related to Phases 3 and 4 of the Bowling Creek Greenway. And our Planning Director, Trish McGuire, has a few opening comments.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Manager. And before Trish starts, I do just want to acknowledge, Mr. Manager, that as you know, council members have received some public comments about this agenda item tonight, and some of those comments included suggestions about how we, the council, would be designating specific town employees to do specific things associated with this scope of work. And I want you to know that we know that that's not our role, but I wanted to say that out loud so that you know and the staff knows that we know that that's not our role. What we do get to do tonight, though, which is incredibly important, is offer feedback on the draft scope and give you, I think, ultimately what I hope will be very clear direction about what we would like to achieve here, what we want that scope of work to be, so that you can then go figure out how to get it done. So,
Thank you, Mayor, for those comments.
Trish, welcome.
Well, yes, same. Thanks. It's great to see you all, as always. This item for everybody in the audience just follows from a couple of other actions. Number one, the adoption of the Bowling Creek Greenway Conceptual Master Plan back in 2009, the council's resolution in 2019 to proceed with a work session on community engagement, because the action in 2019 had identified some additional public engagement on phases 3 and 4 of the Greenway. And then the work session with the COVID delay was held just a few, I guess 6 weeks ago or so, on February 14th of this year. And you all did have a lot to share that night. It was really a lot of engagement, lots of comments, lots of input, and very helpful. I think in summary, you certainly discussed one possibility for this was focusing on just specifically selecting an alignment, a point that was made during the initial plan development, and also using the planning process from 2019 and from 2009, and the questions that were identified and included in the plan itself, the types of things that were provided to the community, and questions that we asked and feedback we received. You also identified some thoughts about the way we would use the town's existing policies on engagement, both One Orange, our racial equity plan, and our inclusive Carrboro communications and engagement plan, as well as incorporate tools for understanding how climate action intersects with this project. We also heard from you about the people in the community you wanted to hear from, principally those who had not been heard from before. And along the way, since 2009 as well, when you've heard comments about this project. We heard specifically about residents, we heard about business owners, we heard about business employees of businesses, commuters, students, people of varying mobility in the community, and others as well. And so what we've tried to do is to provide for you, and this is just the scope of a project, it isn't an RFP. So there are many aspects of an RFP that are not provided here for you to consider. But we've tried to focus on sort of a general scoping of the project with an emphasis on clarifying exactly the purpose that you all are seeking in this step of engaging with the community on this. So I do want to note that I've got it up on the screen as a Word document. We can edit it together if you'd like to. And however you'd like to proceed, we're here to help you get to the next step. To the question of the racial equity pocket questions, which may have pertained to this agenda item earlier, because this is not the entire RFP for the project, we had not fleshed out all of those, but certainly understand the need to do that as since there'll be engagement with businesses who might provide services to us, et cetera, have begun asking the questions, the pocket questions for this particular project, and we'll provide that as we proceed. That is sort of the approach to have it. I mean, the questions of racial equity are involved in the work as we develop the scope and all of our conversations. But those questions as a final product, we're just waiting until we moved a little bit further along this draft process. Ready to take a look at the document and hear what you have to say about it if it's helpful. So.
Sure. So I think, we received the draft scope of work in our agenda packet, so I'm assuming everyone has had a chance to review that. Hoping that we will not find ourselves doing as appealing as the invitation is, Trish, find ourselves editing a Word document with you tonight. But maybe what we can do is, I guess I'd like to, since we have the draft scope of work before us, maybe recognize council members to either ask any questions that they have about the draft or share any comments they have about kind of how we'd like to move forward with the scope of work. Barbara.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Trish. When I think about the pocket questions, I just think about the history of the Bowling Creek item in general and not just the scope, because certainly we have more than enough history around the item to kind of tackle those pocket questions, and that's just what I was thinking. And so this is about a facilitated community engagement and participation process. And so I do recognize that planning is involved, but I would also think that our illustrious communications director, Kat Lazorko, I don't know how the agenda item is set up, but we're talking about community engagement. And so I'm not trying to put Kat on the spot, by the way, but certainly when I think about communication, she's at the heart of that, for the town, and certainly at the heart of the inclusive Carrboro community communications plan. So I was wondering if I don't know if she's had a chance to look over this or if there was a place for her to, have comment about it or. Because it's community engagement. I mean, that was like a comment and a question all in one.
I'll see if I can answer that, Councilmember Fushi. So yes, the scope does refer to the inclusive Carrboro. And so when we get to the actual implementation of the scope, definitely Kat will be involved in the process of community engagement. But she did see the scope as is drafted here. And we do refer to inclusive Carrboro, which definitely includes Kat and her staff, Eve, as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. White. And so I'm just going to go one step further. Okay, no, I won't. I'll wait until I won't. I will wait until, we go through the draft. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Barbara. I guess what I'd be interested in hearing from council members about is whether you feel like the draft scope of work here represents the work you'd like to see done, or if there's something else you had in mind, or if there are changes you would make here, or what. Rather than, has everyone had an opportunity to read the document? Eleazar, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And kind of going off of your prompt, and thank you for everything that's already been done. I just wonder, or maybe I'm understanding this wrong, but this seems a little bit broader than what we had discussed at the work plan. I was thinking we were going to see something more along the lines of how, or engaging folks on those options and those alignments. To me, this RFP or this draft scope kind of starts from, ground zero and kind of rehashing some of the conversations around the master plan. And I don't want us to get bogged down in relitigating or doing a lot of the work that's already been done. We've been hearing for over 14 years. Well, I haven't, because I haven't been here for 14 years, but we've been hearing that as a council for 14 years. I'm just more along the lines of, like, I'd rather see something more along of these options, like what are we getting from folks, and when we're talking about including folks here, I just think this is a little bit too broad for my taste. I want something that's going to be concise, that says, we've had this conversation, we have all this information already, we've received all this input already. We want to get input as to how we want to move forward on this project. And, engage new communities that haven't been engaged, talk about renters, talk about, that part. As I see it now, I just think it's well out of the scope of what at least I want to see. And I may be in the minority. That's completely fine if I am.
I've got Sammy next, and then we'll go to Susan, and then Danny, and then
Yeah,
Randy.
thanks, Eleazar. Similarly, I feel like reviewing kind of what the original direction was, we had come to a point where there was a request for more time so we could have more public engagement to address and look at these specific alternative alignments within phases 3 and 4. And so, for example, when it says project purpose is to engage the community in determining its vision and expectations for consideration of phases 3 and 4 of the Bowling Creek Greenway, that to me, like Eleazar was saying, is really opening this up a lot more than what my understanding is. What we should be doing here is getting public input as a continuation of what we've done already in the Greenway plan, specifically with the alternatives that were requested to be continued to be reviewed in the Greenway, which are the upland forest, I believe, the Bowling Creek connector, the Creekside, and then the resultant best alternative. That was the outcome of the Greenway plan itself. So I would like for example, that first sentence to be very clear in that intention, and I think that thereafter a lot will follow in terms of like the degree of what the scope is to be. And those are my initial comments for tonight.
Thanks, Sammy. Susan, you're next, and then Danny, then Randy.
Thank you, Mayor. And I have just a few initial comments. I support everything that has been said so far in terms of the scope feeling very broad, and I was hoping that it could be narrowed. My takeaway from the work session is that we were going to really focus on how do we bring in more voices, new voices, different voices, by using our inclusive engagement plan to really reach out to folks who have normally not been part of this whole process of soliciting feedback. So I was hoping to see a real focus on the engagement. I've changed my tune on this because at the work session, I was initially thrilled to hear about the possibility of using a consultant for the engagement piece. And I've been thinking a little bit more about that, and I just want to bring this perspective. We have a a communication engagement team that has been through racial training here. That has actually written our inclusive engagement plan and has a whole proven track record in terms of bringing all community members to the table, including with our comprehensive plan. So I just want to throw out that idea, if communication engagement had the bandwidth, does that make sense to try to bring that in-house? I don't know the answer to that question. A couple of other things. One is I felt like the scope was missing specific timetables. I would feel better having a little bit more structure in terms of the time frame to this. I'm still hoping that things can move along to the point that even this fall we can be taking a vote. And so my hope would be to kind of see the structure in place that allows that decision making, everything in place in terms of doing the outreach over the course of the next few months so that council's in a position to be making a decision this fall. The other thing I just wanted to add is in terms of the context on the public education piece, another thing I thought was missing, and I thought it was important, is that it's hard to look at our greenway without also looking at it in context in terms of Chapel Hill. And Chapel Hill, my understanding is they now have I think an RFP has been issued now for the extension of their Bowling Creek Greenway all the way to Estes. And so as we're looking at, which of the preferred aisle alignments here in Carrboro, I think it's really important that we're sort of mindful of what our neighbor is doing and all of the potential for leverage that would come with that, all of the potential for economic development, especially as we're putting in multi-use paths along Estes. So I thought that should be part of the scope too, is bringing in that context in terms of what Chapel Hill is doing and looking at the leveraging opportunities there. So those are my initial comments.
Thank you, Susan. Next, I have Danny and then Randy.
Thank you much, Mayor. I'm just trying to pull a particular day here. I guess I can be pretty brief. I think I agree with everything that's been said. And I think one thing that would firm up this discussion a great deal is to introduce the idea of October 17th, 6 months from 2 weeks, 2 months and 6 weeks, 6 months from 2 weeks from now would be, I think, 6 months, 2 weeks. October 17th is 6 months from 2 weeks from now. So 6 months and 2 weeks. That gives us a couple weeks to act on the decision that we get to tonight. And then 6 months, more or less, and understanding, that there's probably some wiggle room and, those 2 weeks, that's a quick turn for anything that we're asking. But, 6 months is ample time. It's an ample window. Very often our public engagement periods are 90 days. That's twice as long. I think coming to a decision by that date as a goal, which we have blanks to do, and I appreciate I think we are intended to provide this feedback. I don't think that that's an omission on staff's part. I think they're looking to us for guidance. And I really appreciate the pretty tremendous amount of work this document is trying to do. As my colleagues have talked about sort of simplifying this in some ways, I think it is, given that we have such a well thought out community engagement strategy, and so much of the sort of priors that we would be giving to an outside consultant do come from our One Orange racial equity framework and similar policies that we've adopted. And that we are interested in keeping this quick. I think that sort of separates out the issues of public engagement and then sort of some of the more technical issues that come up in here with, considerations of individual alignments, considerations of rails to trails, considerations of the regulatory framework. I think each of those are, important to consider, but not most appropriately done within this scope, which really should just focus on the public engagement about the alignments as agreed to in the plan. That's really what the intention was in taking more time. And so if we are able to sort of excise those considerations and focus on the public engagement, my hope would be that we're then also looking at a series of quite a bit smaller issues that might be better handled by our town. Updates to the regulatory framework, I think, is something potentially that our staff would be able to provide in, I would hope, within 6 months. that's a liftable lift. So, yeah, I think the nut of what I'm saying really does revolve around that mid-October date. 6 months and a little bit of change reflecting some startup time to take tonight's comments and make them actionable. But then giving this, twice as long as legal mandates for zoning and development issues often take. That's a healthy amount of time considering how much thinking our town has put into most of the materials that are informing the scope.
Thanks, Danny. Next, I have Randy.
I really appreciate the work, the scope of work document. I went through it. I think it was well thought out. I felt like it was balanced and that folks in the community taking a look at the scope of work would feel that it is meant for everyone, that it feels inclusive. I do not feel that it's too broad because I think that it tries to capture the different ways of that folks are trying to understand the information and trying to get engaged with the question. I did feel that under the research and analysis, that given that the 2009 consultant's report is 14 years old, the word climate is not even in this document, which, by the way, I reread this entire document in the last 2 weeks yet again, which makes it maybe the fourth time. There's much in the 2009 that is worth carrying with us in 2023. There's much that needs to be informed by what we know now about climate, what we know now about what we've done since 2009 and 2010. The 1B multi-use path was only visioned. It is now in place. The wish for and the press for Sewell School Road side path, a separated side path, was only dreamt about then, and now it is something that is not only on the MPO list, but it's something folks are talking about. There's a need by the community to answer questions about the viability of the rails to trails. A lot of folks are very excited about the possibility for rails to trails, and when we met at the legislative breakfast with our legislative delegates, we were told that there's potential conversation around the decommissioning of the coal plant at UNC, which would mean ultimately the decommissioning of the Norfolk Southern spur to UNC. We can't ignore these potential networked and integrated components that would amplify the trails and greenway possibilities. And it shouldn't be an afterthought. It should be part of how we're thinking right now. Carrboro is 6.5 miles. 429 acres of that 6.5 miles are forested right in the middle. It's really important for us to have the data on the health of the stream and the soils in the riparian buffer. We should not be going forward without evidence of the abiotic and biotic testing to know the quality of our stream where it is protected by canopy. One simple example is that because of the canopy in the Carrboro Bowling Forest in Bowling Creek, the waters are going to be cooler than they would be on the Chapel Hill side, which is wide open. It's things like that that make a difference to the invertebrates, the macroinvertebrates, the organisms that are going to live not only in the creek, the aquatics, but the ones that live in the riparian buffer and in the vernal pools. This is really important because we just read out a proclamation tonight on native plants. And in that riparian buffer, were we to clear cut for paving, it would destroy those native plants. Last week was Creek Week. We do not have data on the health of our creek. Prior to that, we had a week of where we were focused on invasives. We plant trees. We need to speak from one side of our mouth instead of giving a proclamation, but being willing to, without evidence, clear cut through the riparian buffer. This is important because when you have a forest in your midst, as we do, we have a different obligation to stewardship for the environment and for the climate. We read out climate numbers regarding how much the offset in 30 years would be for the solar. And yet, we know in Carrboro, the tree canopy currently sequesters 9,276 metric tons a year, not 3,000 and change over 30 years. We absolutely need to have the scientific data that tells us how we go forth and where in an alignment we go forth. No one is saying we don't want trails. We want trails. We want greenway. But where and how needs to be carefully considered. Why? Because we're in an academic community and we understand the importance of evidence. Why? Because a forest is a living thing. There are rights of nature, and that's our job, to uphold them and see how they pan out. It's really important not to be afraid to get the data. It's really important not to be afraid to inform folks and have them weigh in on the science. I think lastly, I want to say that in absence of doing due diligence on collecting the data and finding out how the trails and the multi-use path are used now, and finding out whether high school students would in fact use a paved trail in the riparian buffer to get to school, and by not surveying them or bringing this question to our own youth advisory board or our youth council, we're basically saying we don't want to broaden the conversation because we're afraid of the outcome. I'm not afraid of the outcome. If I see that there is authentic input from everyone, I'm more than happy to go with it. But I want to be sure it's authentic, and I want to be sure that the science backs up the decision-making that we have. We're terribly polarized, and if we just go forth because we want to hurry, and because hurrying satisfies some need, it doesn't satisfy the community's need. because there are a lot of people in Carrboro who have no idea that this conversation is taking place, and they have no idea of why there is interest in protecting the riparian buffer. I'll stop there. I accept this report as it stands.
Thank you, Randy. So I'll just share a few comments of my own since we've heard from folks, and then go around again if there are people who have additional comments. As I know both Danny and Barbara said that they have indicated they do. So Trish, thank you so much for the work that I know went into this scope of work. It covers, I think you were faced with the task, as you suggested at the beginning, of distilling a lot of information and commentary that came out during the work session, and I think that is covered here. Although I do agree that the scope of the work that's described here is broader than what I had in mind, similar to what you've heard from other council members. And the reason that I believe that is that, or that I feel that way, is that I try to keep reminding myself of why we're here, why we're having this conversation, which is that the decision of the council in 2009 was very explicitly made up of a few things. One was to adopt the plan, and we have been, in fact, implementing the plan since that time. This is the so-called 14-year-old report that we have is not simply a shelved report. It's an actively implemented project that is going on today. Second, that the various alternative alignments that were shared as part of the public engagement process at that time were to be retained in the report for future consideration, and that then we wanted additional public input on phases 3 and 4. That's the question before us, and it seems to me that that should be at the core of what's reflected in the scope of work for additional public input, which is we have an adopted plan, it's being implemented, we have a portion of that plan that is waiting on some additional public input, including input on a variety of alternative conceptual alignments that were presented and studied by the consultant at that time. And we want to hear from a broader cross-section of the community about those conceptual alignments. That's what was discussed, I believe, in 2009. And as Sammy very helpfully shared some recordings from that meeting back then that are on the town's website, it was pretty enlightening, actually, not only to read the documentary material from that time, but to also go back and listen to those conversations, including the conversation that led to the resolution adopted that evening, which I just described. So that's where my head is when I'm thinking about how much narrower the scope of this work should probably be. Let's hear people's input on these conceptual alignments, hear from a broader cross-section of the community than was heard from in 2009, and hear from a larger sample of people than was heard from in 2009. That's my primary interest here. I have both Danny and Barbara have indicated they wanted to share some additional comments, so we'll go to Danny and then to Barbara.
Thank you, Mayor. I am going to propose a resolution that we formally direct staff to pursue the mayor's feedback, and I think where most of the board is feeling, and to, in that resolution, to direct staff to report back, to finish public input not later than 10/17, to report back to us not later than 10/31. So I am proposing a motion that we direct staff to conclude the public engagement process that we are describing by 10/17, not to be reported back later than 10/31. And as part of that resolution, encouraging staff to consider whether to meet that timeline, they have the ability to engage a consultant and whether that's necessary. I think it may well be that that's something that we can handle as a staff, but that's, sort of up to them within that timeline. But I do want to be very clear that I would, welcome their efforts to meet that timeline without a consultant.
And I will second that.
Taking some notes, y'all. Hold on one second. Okay. So I'll come to you next, Barbara. But first, just want to clarify, Danny, the motion is to direct staff to engage in the public input process between now and October 17th. The report to the council no later than the end of October. But can you be a little more clear with me about what you meant about, you said what the mayor said, but.
Well, yeah, so I think particularly the reduction of this exact draft is to reduce the scope to public input on the proposed alignments. So, I think I have some wiggle room on exactly how, that is accomplished within the time frame. I think the time frame does a lot of that work. Since that work is done, we have the proposed alignments. If we, are efficient about time boxing this, that is, I think, our clear purpose here.
Okay, so then the motion is to direct staff to conduct public input process to collect input on the conceptual alignments included in the report between now and October 17th, and to report back to the council on that engagement no later than October 31st. Is that your correct motion?
Yes.
And it's been seconded by Eleazar, is that correct? All right, I have Barbara next, and then I have Randy.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm looking at Councilmember Haven O'Donnell, and it's impactful for me because, I feel her pain. And it's not about this Bowling Creek item, it's about another item. But I guess what I'm thinking, I understand it's been 14 years. There are a lot of environmental implications or considerations. And so I want us to be really careful that we're not mowing over anybody in the process. I appreciate Danny, kind of pushing forth, for the scope of work. We do need a time frame. Now, I agree with that. We need a time frame. I'm trying to okay, so Danny just said it about gathering public input. It was a 6-month time frame. And so in that 6-month time frame, are we also gathering maybe some missing pieces over these 14 years? Some regulatory items or, so it's public input around all of that. That's what I'm trying to understand. Correct?
Well, regulatory shifts are not, to my mind, public feedback.
Okay.
That, that we need to get that from our staff. But divorced from the public engagement, I think an update on the regulatory climate of the proposed alignments is something our staff should be able to handle.
Okay.
So, I mean, to my mind, many of the science considerations are in the master plan as being provided for within the design and engineering phases. And so I definitely want all of these gaps to be filled. I want to pursue all of this knowledge. There's absolutely nothing I'm trying to skip.
Okay. I didn't think so.
But, just as far as the public engagement, I think the purpose of public engagement is not and cannot be to relitigate the entire issue and to start the plan over from scratch.
Right. Okay. I appreciate that clarification. And so I'm also squarely centered on the community engagement piece of it again, and would like to see our own communications director heavily involved in that process. And if we're going to, I guess another question is about this, the use of a consultant, and I see that it says staff are also examining the on-call contractors recently selected by the Durham Chapel Hill Carrboro, I'm tongue-tied, MPO. And so we know and feel that that is a quicker process, but I say if it's needed, because I'm like Mayor Pro Tem Romaine, if we can centralize this in-house, somehow, and use our own plans of community engagement. And I'm sure Ms. Lazorko will say if she needs help, which I guess would look like us, potentially bringing somebody else in to help. But I would like to see us squarely centered on our own inclusive Carrboro communications plan. And so I appreciate, the time frame. I mean, I just feel like it's been, and I'm going to say it, it's been 14 years. And so we're going to move or we're not going to move. What are we going to do? But in moving, move in the appropriate fashion. And that's what I'm asking for. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. Randy, you're next.
Okay,
And then-
so I believe in the facilitation. I think it's really, really important because this is controversial, because neighborhoods are split, neighbors are split. Folks are feeling that they are targeted. They're feeling like they can't speak. I do not want to put that on our staff person to try and journey through. I really think it's important that this council had 3 retreats in order for us to be seated at a dais together. What's out there in community is really divisive, and folks are really uncomfortable. And so we get a smattering of folks who come here, some to speak, some who will not speak, some who are terrified to speak. And that's why having a clean facilitation by someone who is not part of our town staff is really important. Not only just because for Kat dumping this in her lap, but because we want Carrboro to believe in us. We want Carrboro citizens to believe that we really want to hear from them when they know that 6 people on council are rushing headlong to get this done before Election Day. Yes, I'm going to say it, Barbara, because that's what this is about. This is not an election football. You want to talk about 14 years? I've just watched this country go back 50 because they were rushing to get something done. And they didn't care. I have been involved with the climate movement since 1969, before half the people in this town were born. And we knew then what was going to happen. And we kept pushing a little bit at a time, incrementally, so that we could advance certain concepts: recycling, solar, renewable energy. Just think this through with me for a moment. 15, 20 years from now, the children who are born in Carrboro, and they go into the forest, and the forest is crisscrossed with concrete. They're going to perceive it as being a space that it has to be a convenience with man-made materials. Children who go in there today, you know, they're in the environment that the organisms and all of the organisms, whether it be trees or it be mammals, whatever, the owls, that's their environment. It's like when I took students to the Lemur Center, I didn't take them to see the cages, I brought them into the enclosures. That's an enclosure. And we lose sight of that. We lose sight of that learning. And Dave, I'm going to say this to you and all the folks who are concerned about accessibility. If you go to the Riverwalk in Hillsborough that goes east to the Occoneechee Restoration, the Occoneechee Speedway, and the new proposed Eno preservation, there are 3 kinds of surfaces. There's a sand surface, like at Martin Luther King Park. There's the bluestone, and there's natural mulch surface. And the natural mulch surface is right next to the parking lot with signs for handicap accessibility. So, it may not be that it has to be concrete, and it may not be that it has to be one particular alignment. So, I could support what Danny's proposing, were we to make sure that we're going to have the science and that we're going to make sure that the abiotic and biotic testing is done so that we can show the health of the stream, because everyone is so convinced that it is impaired to an extent that is worse than where it was, and that's just not true. In addition, I want the data on use in the forest. We're assuming everybody is going to be walking or biking to go to work or to go to school, and we just don't have that data. And if folks are afraid of data, they're saying something else entirely. They're absolutely saying, I don't want to hear what science has to say because it interferes with what I believe and what will serve my purposes. I want to be very careful that in an academic community, we do not do that. You know, in the back of my head, I can hear Carl Sagan speaking when he talked through the ages, how the science was always dismissed in light of what people wanted to get done. We are where we are today in the industrialization and the corporatization of this country because people put their convenience first.
Thanks, Randy. Before we go forward, and I do have a couple more people signed up to speak that have asked to speak. I just want to remind council members, you know, our goal here is to really define what the scope of work is that we want done. The decision about who's doing the work, whether the town needs additional capacity to complete the work, and all that stuff is the very thrilling job that our town manager gets to take on after we're finished with our discussion tonight. So I just want to clarify. I know we have a great town staff on board and great policies in place to help direct the way that work is done. But I just want to make sure that we don't have to get in the weeds of who's exactly doing the work. So I'm going to move. And then the second thing that I wanted to just address and kind of link something that Randy was saying to really comment that suggestion that Barbara made about making sure that we're also getting this other information, right? That there are regulatory matters, there are technical matters, there are engineering and design matters, right? Going out and getting public input on the various conceptual alignments, as was directed by the council in 2009, does not preclude the council also receiving information about these other matters. Of course, those things will be taken into consideration, just as they were in 2009. A lot of the engineering and design matters, in fact, weren't even discussed or considered as definitive in the original report because it was appropriately identified as a topic to be considered during the engineering and design phase. So if there are interests in the community about different surfaces, for example, and these other kinds of alternatives, those are things that can be studied and determined once a project is moving forward. But it doesn't make sense for the staff to, just like with the rest of the parts of the plan, to go forward and do that if they haven't been given clear direction that the council is interested in that. So I appreciate the need for all of this information, including engineering and design information, but at the right time and the right moment in the process. All right, so next up is Sammy, I think.
Sure.
And Barbara had her hand up as well.
Yeah. So for me, it's I've felt at times that this process, one of the ways in which it's been delayed is it's felt like it's been delayed in part because the status quo has been what is wanted to be maintained. So if y'all remember, our revisiting the original motion from 2009 was voted upon by this council to have that work session. And it wasn't unanimous, which is unfortunate. I feel like there's postponing us engaging with that original motion by the 2009 council now has created this sense of pressure. And had we addressed this 5 years, even much earlier than 14 years, I think the community would not have festered as much. I feel like we're really airing a wound because we are divided as a community in terms of how to go about addressing this question. And, I've been struggling from the very beginning. You all know I've been trying to put this before us. I made this motion, 3 years ago to have that work session. So it's very frustrating to me to feel like we're being asked to go slower than we've already been going, despite the fact that we've been trying to go fast, or at least I've been trying to go fast since we've made that motion. Having said that, I do look forward to hearing about further data. I want to hear about, for example, I heard from the presentation of the person who did the original study. One of the reasons that people pave and make hard surfaces is because when there's overuse of a path, what ends up happening is there's a lot of erosion, and that itself is kind of a threshold of when that becomes problematic. And so paving actually helps with that runoff. I heard when they did the paving along Bowling Creek on Umstead Road, the Diener, or whatever it's called now, did a study that actually showed an improvement of runoff after they did a before and after. And so I'd be interested in seeing what that study showed so that the full council could see what that is. In terms of data about the use now, I don't find that kind of data as significant because the path itself will change the way in which the path or that corridor will be used. There's this analogy of when pilots, when they fly, they account for the wind and they actually aim upwind so that they actually land where they want to be. If you were to go towards where you want to be, you end up not being where you wanted to be. And so if we rely on that kind of data of how people are using it, we will definitely not get to a place where, for example, while it is true some schools would not be serving those neighborhoods, if we had a way in which to get there, there'd be more pressure to have the school board make the change so that more students would be able to walk and bike to schools. But if we just go by the fact that currently that policy doesn't exist and we just stick to keeping the status quo in terms of infrastructure to allow for that to happen, then we will cement the school board's policy. So yes, I do look forward to hearing more and accounting for that data when the time comes after having received more public input, which, by the way, will likely include some experts in our community who will be providing this kind of information about stream runoffs and all the other factors that we need to be considering.
Thank you. I have next Barbara, and then Susan, and Eleazar, and then I'll remind folks that we do have a motion on the table that has been seconded.
Oh, right. Okay. Thank you, Mayor. I want to go back to something Councilmember Haven O'Donnell said about how polarizing the issue is and putting our staff kind of in the midst of that. And so I want to use our framework for the community engagement. I just think that is just so important. I want to use our inclusive Carrboro communications plan, and I don't want to put any undue pressure on my neighbor and our communications director, Kat Lazorko, but it's a good thing, right? So why have the plan if we're not going to use it? I mean, I just feel like this is a good time to use it. Now, I'm not going to say she won't need help. I don't know what she's going to need, but I'm still kind of squarely centered on using our own plan. And if we do need a consultant, I think Trish, it says in here that staff is still looking at that on call with the MPO, and that sounds like a quicker path. If we should, when you say you're still examining that, what do you mean when you say you're still examining? Have you actually had contact or know a little bit?
No, we've not contacted any. The MPO did an RFQ process to select a series of on-call consultants, and they were assessed for and kind of categorized based on their expertise in certain areas. And community engagement was one of the categories that was utilized for, and so some of the consultants are just design folks, others are engagement folks. Some of them do multiple things. And so, and this was following the mayor's comments at the work session. We checked I think there are 6 of them that may have a community engagement as one of their areas of expertise. So we could consider approaching them, I think, as a possible way to move a little bit more quickly in that kind of in that kind of procurement process.
Okay, that sounds good. I just don't want us to forget about our own plans.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Whether or not Ms. Lazorko is, I feel like she'll be engaged to some degree, but that would be up to her. But certainly to use our own plan when we're talking about reaching folks, right? I think is a good deal. And I do want to go back again to thoughtful consideration. I appreciate Danny putting the timeline on it. We have to have one. I mean, I just don't see us not having some kind of endpoint for the gathering of data and community engagement. I don't think that's something we should leave open-ended, because that will help us, to know when we're, kind of getting to a point where we could potentially be taking a vote, to make a decision. And I don't mean to, and, Councilmember Haven O'Donnell, I respect you to the highest. I love the history you bring to the council, the passion. I know you're passionate about the issue. But I want us to get to a point where we're saying, hey, we're going to stop here. We're going to collect this data. We're going to do community engagement. And, we're going to research and analyze all that or whatever it is. And then we're going to have a place where we're going to take a vote and close the loop on the item. But being thoughtful about it. I just feel like we need to get to that place. Now, of course, Councilmember Now has offered up the 6-month time frame. I don't know what anybody else would feel about that. It seems like a lot of folks are amenable to it. Is that enough time to do the community engagement, to gather whatever data, review it and all that, and October 17th? So I guess that's, another question. But we do need to have a time frame so that we can close the loop on Bowling Creek. Now, that's I'm solid in that. Just when it is, I mean, we need to decide that too. And I mean, I guess I'm asking Mayor Siles, we are cued in on community engagement and kind of saying what we want to see there with the scope of work. But can we just go ahead and tie that, to Danny's point? But I don't know. I'm kind of like, I want everybody to agree. But I feel like everybody's not going to agree. But it's just polarizing enough, right? So, yeah, that's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Barbara. Next is Susan and then Eleazar.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to go back to something that Barbara said a while ago about this really difficult question about the timing. Are we moving too fast or are we not moving fast enough? And Randy, I really appreciate all of your comments and your concern that we need to stop and take more time to respect science and really be sure we know what we're doing before we move forward. And I think that's a really important point. And I also just want to lift up, though, that there's a lot of community members who are feeling that things aren't moving fast enough. So I'm thinking of Mr. Otto. I really appreciate your comments this evening and other folks who are very anxious to get out there and walk. And because it's a very rough, rocky terrain, you're unable to do so. And I just, I want to lift up students who, right now, we're in a horrific bus driver shortage. We have teachers and social workers who are driving kids, picking them up at home and bringing them to school because they don't have a bus. But I'm just thinking about all of these kids who would now have independently they can get to and from school. I'm thinking about people who would love to have the opportunity to go out and enjoy nature that otherwise they could not access. I'm thinking of people who would love to be without a car. It's very expensive, and this may open up opportunities for them to not have a car. I'm thinking about people who want to take really small steps each and every day to deal with climate. And I think it's so important that these people are also heard, which is why I'm so excited about this engagement piece, that we talk to renters and we talk to people who are living in manufactured home communities, and we talk to people in historically Black neighborhoods, and we lift up those voices, because as much as there is concern about moving too fast, I think there also are a lot of community members who would say we're not moving nearly fast enough. So I appreciate, Barbara, your comment. I too agree that we do have to put a very structured time frame in place and do everything we possibly can in terms of being at community events, neighborhood events, school events, looking at ways for people to respond in online, collect as much information as we possibly can, but also have a very clear beginning and ending to this. And I too would recommend an October as an endpoint. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Eleazar.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and Mayor Pro Tem, thank you for your comments, because one of my things that I have scribbled on my sheet of paper is this word that we hear, or we've heard in this discussion quite a bit, around experts and around folks who have a higher education. And I just want to make sure that as we move forward with public comment, and we are moving forward with public comment, we're hearing from folks who are not recognized as the experts in science, but are recognized as experts in their own home and experts in getting things done in their own neighborhoods. And I want us to move. I want to hear from folks who have not been heard from before. I think that comes to no surprise to anyone watching at home, anyone in this building or on this dais. We need to engage folks who have not been engaged in this process. I think 6 months is more than enough to get that done with the tools that we already have, tools that the staff of this town have worked hard to create. I think let's just implement those. Let's get this done. We are going to get back a report hopefully we get back a report by the end of October, and then we can decide what we need to do as a council moving forward from there. But let's just get this done, y'all. And with that, I yield back.
Thanks, Eleazar. All right, I'm going to repeat what I believe is the motion, which is to direct staff to conduct public engagement on the alternative alignments in the 2009 report between now and October 17th, and to bring a report to the town council no later than October 31st. Is that the fairly summary of the motion?
I'm sorry. And so all the information is back to us by October 31st. Is that what we're saying? Okay, cool.
And that motion was seconded by Eleazar. Did I fairly read what's contained there?
Correct.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Mr. Manager, do you understand the motion?
I do, yes.
All right. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Okay. Matter passes 6 votes to 1. All right. Thanks everyone for the discussion. Trish, thanks again for all the work on your part to get us here.
Thank you. You're most welcome.
Does everyone want to go forward, or you want to need a bio break or anything? Or all right. All right. Mr. Manager, I think we're ready to go on to the next item.
Okay, let me get there. The next item is Town Council 2022-2023 Retreat Fault Report. The purpose of the agenda item is to provide an update on the Carrboro Town Council Procedures Manual, reconfirm the 13 key strategic areas and deliverables, and discuss the development of the town manager and town clerk performance evaluation tools.
Thank you, Richard. I can kind of take us through one of these very quickly, I think, and that is just, as you all know, we had a draft procedures manual before us at our last retreat. We had some great feedback from all of you during that retreat. I've taken that and incorporated it into a revised draft. I shared that revised draft with each of you by email, I don't know, 10 days ago or so. And I've started getting some feedback from council members and would appreciate receiving feedback from those who have any remaining feedback, end of this week, this weekend, whenever. If you don't have further comments, that's also perfectly fine. Basically, just wanted to reiterate what I told you in the email, which is that what I tried to do in the revised draft was simply reflect what there seemed to be pretty good consensus around in the retreat discussion. So I didn't add a lot of anything else or make changes that I didn't think there was consensus around. I tried to just focus on what we had notes around that there was consensus on. I've gotten feedback from a couple of council members. I appreciate that. And so if y'all could shoot for, end of this week or the weekend or whatever, be very helpful. So we can then bring potentially a final draft back to consider for adoption. Go ahead. Yeah, I think it depends on how quickly I get feedback. So I guess what I would ask, maybe I should be more specific in my request. If you would tell me by the end of this week, by Friday, whether you have, I should say by Thursday, if you would tell me by Thursday whether you have comments. And if you don't, that's fine. And if you do have comments, send them to me. Or it's not going to be on next week's agenda, which is also fine. And it can wait until April 11th or whatever it is. That's fine too.
Right, because I think we're not here for a meeting on the.
It's either going to be next week or it's going to be 2 weeks after that.
Right, so I'm good by the end of the week.
Okay, great. And either way, just let me know. Cool. All right. Item number. Do you want to go into the next item now, or should we skip to why don't we do that? Go in order from what you listed here, Mr. Manager.
Okay, the next item is the list of priorities. If you recall from your retreat, you all went through the sorting activity. And so what you have is a chart that the facilitators provided. And what staff needed is just to make sure we're clear about these projects and to see if you had any additional questions, because what we're going to try to do is align this to the budget process. And so we just wanted to make sure that what's on this list is what you remember. And this can be moved around or revised if needed to be. But there are a couple sections we did have a couple questions on. One is under the amendments to the zoning, there's an item on here that talks about parking minimums for residential, and there's a question about whether this covers downtown as identified in the small area plan. And the question is, do you want the parking minimums to apply to downtown? And secondly, do you want us to develop a small area plan, and which one would that be? Would the downtown be the priority to do one in this 12 to 18 month period? That's the two questions that we had in that section.
Okay. And then the larger question is, are these the 13 priorities you remember us all saying were priorities?
Yes.
Which are the ones in the list with the attachment? Okay. So I will say, yes, the list looked familiar to me. Looked good. And in particular, I think you highlighted in yellow, Mr. Manager, the ones that were kind of these are the ones to focus on in particular over the next, was it 12 to 18 months?
Yes, that's right.
I think those were accurate as well. I have thoughts on some of the items myself, but I'll certainly go to other council members first. So we'll go to Barbara first, and then we'll go to Sammy.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I don't know this line here, this implement the various projects of the comp plan, access to green space within walking distance. And in parentheses, we have Westwood Cemetery. I did bring this issue up with the town manager. And so my issue with that is that, this is still in flux. And what I saw in the comp plan was, it says, through the Carrboro Connects engagement process, there have been calls for converting the undeveloped portion of Westwood Cemetery into a park, while others wish to respect the historic legacy of the cemetery and allow its use as a cemetery to expand. This is an ongoing community issue to be explored further. So I'm not clear how that could ever be a deliverable. And I think it doesn't go, I think it just shouldn't be here. Not the way it's couched in the comprehensive plan, because if that's the case, under connectivity, bicycle, and pedestrian, you need to go ahead and put Bowling Creek. I mean, both of them are in flux. So let's be consistent with what we're doing, realizing we still have to make decisions on both of those items. Thank you.
Good point, Barbara. Thank you. Mr. Manager, can you remind us, so we had a work session on the cemetery issue in particular, and we've already followed up on some of that information, but we're expecting to follow up again at some point. And I don't remember now what the calendar item, what the kind of timeline for that was.
Yes, I believe you gave us 3 months to respond back on those follow-up items.
So that's going to be coming back before us. So it's clearly already something we're dealing with as a matter of business. So I think what Barbara's saying makes sense, was just to remove that. We're already dealing with it as we said we would. Does that make sense, Barbara? Just strike that language. Yeah. Right. Thank you. All right. Next, I have Sammy, and for other hands too, folks.
I just want to remind Mr. Manager, when we had our legislative breakfast and we heard about the money that the governor has, excess money, ARA money for anything, and we really need to get on it. And often we struggle because we don't have money, and I think investing into the staff capacity to really tap into, the base of an iceberg is worthwhile. And specifically, since we're in the midst of developing our weatherization RFP, it sounds like we're on track for getting that staff supplement, like capacity by doing an RFP. To really include in that RFP the leveraging of those funds to really think about, doing all low-income homes within a shorter time frame. I remember you had shared, or someone had shared the cost of what it would, an estimate of what the cost would be to do all low-income homes in town and the time frame for that. So we've done some of that work, and so to really be tuning into what the governor opportunities are to tap in and really turbocharge our ability to do more low-income homes. And depending on how much money is really there to even think about going beyond just low-income homes, any weatherization is climate justice, because any carbon reduction is climate justice. So I just wanted to, flag that, because it seems like it's a huge opportunity. And of course, more generally, our climate plan includes various projects, and perhaps if we could take a look at those and see how we may be able to leverage some of those funds beyond, those funds from the governor, but then there are all these other funds that are currently being offered through the ARA programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Sammy. Can I just take before we, and I see your hand, Susan, kind of a quick poll a little bit. Does everybody remember these 13? Mm-hmm. And they look like the ones that we agreed to? Yeah. Okay. Yes. Confirmed.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll continue. Susan?
Yes, I remember the big rocks, the small rocks, and the pebbles. So. Yes, this looks great. Thank you, Mr. Manager. I had just one question in terms of lifting something up as a priority, especially now with our new assistant town manager on board. I'm very excited to hear the news about Marie Parker. She'll be able to jump right in. Her role will be in part, I guess, overseeing the implementation of our comprehensive plan in a timely way, which brings me to this question. We talked at the retreat about some of the things that we can do to help make our operations more efficient. And one of those things was this whole idea of a portal for, taking requests and somebody following that and seeing, kind of following the timeline when they actually get responses, what have you. Another idea Danny has been really pushing is this idea of a dashboard to be sort of following our progress with the implementation. So I mention all this because I would actually love to lift up some of these things rather than there being, a year out or 18 months out. I would like to see them happen sooner rather than later, so that as Ms. Parker takes on all of her responsibilities in June, we're already getting a more streamlined process for making our operations more efficient and more timely. So I don't know how others feel about that.
Mr. Manager, do you have any comments? Just a reaction or?
Just one correction. This morning in a management team meeting, we looked at a platform called Public Input, which is a way to do intake in terms of, well, it does two things. One, in terms of intake relative to customer inquiries, if you will, but also an engagement process as well. So we're having that conversation this morning. So I think we're on task to bring that to you all for some discussion through the budget process.
And that would be a way of tracking progress and reporting that out in a regular way.
Yes.
Great.
Couple comments. Oh, go ahead, Danny.
Well, I guess on that end, to Susan's point of expediting a couple of these, I don't want to get too into the wish list mode of the meeting. But I guess within the yellow highlighted, I guess I'm curious a little bit about order of operations, relative priority, and timelines, sort of on a sort of more concrete basis in terms of what's ongoing, what any potential blockers that need to be moved by council. I am thinking in particular of the text amendments in the zoning section, but in several of the others that are yellow have already been touched on. So, yeah, I guess within the yellow ones, the ones that we haven't touched on. So we've touched on weatherization. We've touched on, I think, compliance with council policies and some of this first block. So I guess within, funding on climate strategy and the zoning, I'm, just curious if it's possible to be more granular than 12 to 18 months at this point.
Thanks, Danny. I would like to, and Mr. Manager and I have had this conversation a few times already. He sort of knows where I'm coming from on this, but I think I'm also interested in knowing a little bit more about how soon we might see some of these items before us for in the case of text amendments. When will these public hearings happen? When will we have a decision before us? Mr. Manager, you asked a particular question about the item called parking minimums for residential, and whether that should cover downtown. In my mind, yes, absolutely, it should cover downtown. I don't know what the reference there is to small area plan because it seems a little bit out of place, but in any case, I think for me, what's useful is to go back to the language in the comp plan on that particular goal, which says simply remove minimum vehicular parking requirements for residential development close to transit. It then goes on a little bit later to specify what close to transit means. But the direction is clear in my mind. Remove minimum parking requirements for residential development close to transit. So I guess to me that says, again, I'm just interested, I think, like as Danny is saying, is there some sense of when this item, which in my mind seems pretty concrete, will be before us? When will an ordinance be before us?
So in talking with planning, it seems that if they get started fairly soon, there was some analysis they would do, their due diligence, if you will, and could bring a report to council in May with the idea that you would have a decision point, I would imagine, in September, because you have a summer break in there as well. But to go through all the steps of them doing their analysis, setting a public hearing,
Right.
and then getting to advisory boards and getting through all those steps, we thinking maybe about September, you could have us back in front of you.
So you are accounting for things like we have those legislative requirements around public hearings and advisory board input.
Yes.
Okay, great. On the other zoning item listed there, which is the one around residential density near transit. Again, I found it very informative for my benefit to go back and just look at the language of the comp plan on that point for guidance on exactly what it was the council was looking for. This one's obviously a lot more complicated, and I think it probably ultimately implicates a number of strategies and therefore a number of potential amendments. And so I perfectly understand that one is just more complicated. But to the extent that we can start, the word that Danny used was granular, to the extent that as you start marching through these 13 priorities, and in particular the ones that are in highlighting, the more we can learn along the way about when we can expect to see things, I think the better. Those are two that are in my mind are particularly important. I just have an interest in those personally, as you know. Your other question, Mr. Manager, and we should be sure to weigh in on this, everybody, the issue of whether it should apply to downtown, the parking minimum thing, I think clearly it does. That's what the comp plan says. The second question the manager asked was on doing a small area plan. We talked about a few in particular that we've been interested in, and in fact, the comp plan spells out, some that there's interest in. So the question is, do we want to start with one, or do we want to do more than one now, or whatever? So I think weighing in on those two questions would be important for this conversation. Eleazar.
I'm going to leave it with yes. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I'm in agreement that we need to extend this to downtown. And as far as small area plans, I will leave that up to I would rather see more than one, but I also want to make sure that we have the ability to actually complete the goals that we're giving ourselves or giving staff to do. But the more we can complete, the better for me.
Thanks. I'll just echo that. I mean, I've been talking for a long time about Jones Ferry Road, as I've told you, Mr. Manager. But again, I'm amenable to whatever small area plan we can just start with. Let's just get one started, right? If others have an interest in more in doing a downtown one or one or the other. Well, that's my own particular interest, but again, I'm one council member, so yeah. And the reason that I say that is that I just think it is and has been for a long time really ripe for potential redevelopment, which means we need to get out ahead of that, which is why I am particularly interested in it. Danny, go ahead.
Yes to downtown. Yes to Jones Ferry at a minimum, especially just to remind council in light of that fairly promising project we just saw in joint review, harbinger of things to come, right across the street from Willow Creek there. Yep. Yeah, I think that just goes to show. But I would, I don't want to pile on too much. I know that there's work to do in the downtown, and if it's possible to squeeze in some downtown area plan, I think Jones Ferry makes a lot of sense to reprioritize just for its significance for our housing discussions and for our transit discussions and for our equity discussions, and all of that is heavily implicated in that area. But I do think that our downtown, conversations we've been having around parking access, a lot of work that we've done on just, the solarization, the parking, the many other recent discussions come into play in downtown. So I would say that if there is room to begin work on that within our pilot time frame, I would really dig it.
It's a new word.
Okay, everybody good with the removal of parking minimums applies to the whole town, close to transit.
No.
Residential parking minimum.
Residential.
Residential.
Yes, residential.
Specifically what's said in the comp plan.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have a question.
And
It was an open question.
it's true. I should have been clear.
Okay.
Consistent with what's described in the comp plan, removing residential parking minimums near transit, as again defined in the comp plan. Randy, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to be very clear that near transit needs to be clear. Being a quarter mile or a half mile from transit is not being near transit. And so I would like to be very careful when we talk about residential density, and we do not have true transit options. So I want to be sensitive to that. I have no problem with downtown. It makes perfect sense to me. But when we start to talk residential and we get outside of a mile, we do not have the bus transit that we need. And we don't even have the micro transit that we should be working towards. The other point that was made about the small area plans, I agree with a small area plan, at least create an outline and an overview for downtown, because downtown is going to be changing so rapidly. We should be at least thinking forward and anticipating how the changes that are going to come to downtown should be planned for, and that especially for economic development, that we look at what's possible and start to plan for those changes.
Agreed, totally. Susan?
Yes to downtown, yes to area plans, starting with Jones Ferry. And I also just wanted to mention that where it says amend zoning ordinance to allow greater density near transit, I was really happy to see that it also includes near greenways. And so living on the northern part of town, my hope is that we create more and more opportunities for people to, on that part of town, to be accessing greenways. So I'll be looking forward to us making some progress there too.
Thank you, Susan. Next, Sammy.
Just want to make sure, because some things are being underscored, that that under climate, this aspect about budgeting for implementing the town's climate plan be understood, that it is still a priority. I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Sammy, because I want to make sure everybody understands that when I see the yellow highlighting, that to me is, those are all still the top priorities. They're all priorities. But the highlighting ones, I don't mean to suggest, Sammy, that some are more, Okay. Mr. Manager, you have feedback on the questions you asked. Do you need any kind of formal? Can I entertain a motion to offer feedback to the manager that we reaffirm the 13 priorities?
And based on the comments made tonight, and we'll sort that out, but yes.
Based on comments made tonight, that we agree that the potential text amendment regarding residential parking minimums should apply to the downtown, and that we are interested in at least one small area plan with a priority for the Jones Ferry Road corridor, and then potentially, or as possible, it's getting started on a downtown small area plan.
So moved. Oh.
It's been moved by Randy, seconded by Eleazar. Any further discussion?
Wait, when you clarify it should apply to the downtown, you're including the transportation corridors?
So I'm referring to the language that's in the comp plan, which is remove parking minimums for residential development in areas close to transit, and it does define what that means.
Okay.
Just confirming for the staff that includes downtown.
Yes. Okay.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Matter passes unanimously. Finally, as the agenda abstract describes, Randy and I had the really good experience, I thought, of attending a webinar from the School of Government with the town manager, as we had kind of talked about in the retreat that we would be doing, about kind of assessment tools and processes for doing the annual performance evaluation of town clerk position and the town manager. So happy for Randy to kind of share her thoughts about what that webinar was all about and how it went. I think what we're seeking from you all tonight is really kind of your nod of approval for us to help pull together some of the assessment tool examples that were shared with us, and bring those to you all for consideration. And then what we also would hope to do tonight is set out a timeline for when that annual evaluation should take place. We've talked about that a little bit in the retreat, but just getting that on the books, like we're going to do it in September for both the clerk and the manager every year. That's when the time's going to be, and we're just going to settle on that so that it's in the calendar. And then, so what that would mean is that in the next few weeks or so, Randy and I would need to come back to you all with some of these tools that we got a chance to see and some feedback from the council about how we want to put that evaluation tool together. That's the general idea. Randy, did you want to share any about our experience?
It was an excellent seminar, and I carved out from 8 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon, and we even finished a little bit early, but it was well worth the investment of time to think about not only clerk manager assessments, but just delving deeper into what a significant assessment can be and bring, and what our role is vis-a-vis those tools.
The other point that it really brought home for me that I think is important is that and it's timely for tonight's agenda item, is that it made that connection between being sure to set your goals with your manager and your clerk so that when the evaluation process is actually done, there's something to evaluate on. And so it's good that we're having this conversation tonight to reaffirm the priorities from the comp plan, to talk more about the staff work that they're doing around the strategic planning and that kind of thing, so that when we're having a conversation with the town manager and the town clerk about performance goals, we have something to pin that to, if that makes sense. Mr. Manager, did you want to add anything about the webinar that we attended, or?
No, then I thought it was very productive as well. I mean, I've been through a few of these in my career, but it was nice to be in that course to hear some of the things I've done in my past be reconfirmed. It was a good session.
So is everybody fine with the idea of us settling on September as the annual evaluation date for both the town clerk and the town manager? September. That would be.
Almost 2 years, right?
Yeah. Well, we need some time to pick it. We'll need some time to, put the assessment tool together and the process we're going to use, and just having it at the same time every year, I think, is helpful. Okay. So maybe Randy and I can agree to bring back these tools or some. Yeah, as soon as we get together, Randy.
Is it the same tool for the evaluation of the manager and the clerk, or are they?
Structurally, they're the same. I mean, you're going to have different goals in mind for each person because their positions and responsibilities are different. But it's basically the kinds of questions you should be asking to do the evaluation. Okay, well then Randy and I will put our heads together on that. So maybe I should just say, can I have a motion to confirm that the council would like to hold performance evaluations annually for the town manager and the town clerk every September?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Eleazar, seconded by Barbara. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Matter passes unanimously. Mr. Manager, anything else under this item? Any items under matters by council members?
Thought you were going to add one.
We are after this. All right, we have one more matter, and that's from the town manager.
Yes, just briefly, I sent an email earlier today, but according to the Town Code, Chapter 4, the personnel policy, anytime a permanent, full-time, or part-time employee who's granted a leave of absence without pay for a period of up to 12 months by the manager must report that to the council's information at a council meeting. So by way of the email and my reporting tonight, I'm doing that in accordance with our Town Code.
Thank you for that email. And Mr. Manager, there was a question from Councilmember Slade about the town's practice of essentially allowing employees to donate leave to an employee. I think we could get more information about that. I think Sammy's question was an interesting one. So.
Yes, we'll send more information details, but our shared leave program is also in our personnel policy, and it defines how that works as well, but we'll send a direct answer back to his questions.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, I look forward to it, and it's in the email. We'll go into it further, but I'm interested in, like, if we have staff that are giving up their time and they could potentially be needing it because they might get sick, I would hate for them to not be able to do it because they were so kind to their colleagues.
So in short, the way it works, any employee who's in need of shared leave can apply. So there's no way to credit it back, but moving forward, any employee could apply for the leave and other employees could add into that bank, if you will, to help that employee. Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
But in this instance, in this case, he ran out of that donated.
I want to be sure we're careful about personnel issues.
Yes.
I'm not speaking to a specific employee, just the policy, the way
Generally
it works.
speaking,
Right.
if an employee were to run out of the pool that other employees gave, I just want to make sure that there's recourse for that. Thanks.
That's a good question, Sammy. Thank you. All right. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
It's moved by Eleazar, and I'm going to give the second to Susan this time. Spread the wealth. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned.
Buenas noches.